Hi and welcome to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we're going to be painting some wildflowers on a really nice abstract background. Let's get started. So I'm adding a little bit of water to my brush and I'm going to start right into the blue. So up in the corners I want it to be a little bit darker, and you can see that by adding the water it really lets it thin out and get some really nice coverage on the canvas. So this is called Brilliant Blue, and you can see that it's a very, very strong blue, even though it's nice and light. The reason I like to use that one is that all I have to do is I'm going to grab a bit of water and a bit of white, and as I come in I can add white to it in all the different areas and it'll pick it up, and that blue actually still stays really nice and bright. So in the background I'm doing a whole bunch of X's just to get some movement in the sky, keeping some areas darker and moving into the light here with the white where I want that sun to be, an idea of that sun peeking through. I'm going to bring that color all the way down, and this is a nice thing about really blending with the acrylics and without having to worry too much about mixing the colors on the palette. I can just work it right on the canvas and decide where I want some of those highlights going over with those little X's a little bit everywhere. Just, I still get the movement, but I'm hiding a few of those brush strokes. Let's make sure that the middle is covered, just so I can come in a little bit and work on top of that. We're going to let that dry, and now I'm going to come down into the bottom. I'm going to wash a bit of that paint off my brush. A lot of times you can just leave it on there and it'll just keep on blending with the other colors. But if I'm drastically changing colors, then I'll go and wash it off. So I'm going to get some of the water. There might be a bit more blue in there, but that's okay. So I'm going to start with my dark diazonine purple. And the purple is the same as that Brilliant Blue, is that it looks really dark and bright when you start, but as you add color to it, that nice bright color that pigment will stay there and keep on coming through. So as I move up, I'm adding a little bit more of the violet just to make it into a bit of a reddish purple as I go. And this, I'm not too worried about my brush strokes because it's going to just give that pop of color behind the flowers. So I'm just coming in and making sure that I'm going over the colors and really getting the different highlights and lowlights, letting the paintbrush play with how I want some of the colors to be, as if there's some flowers in the background there. Now I'm going to wash it off, because in the middle is where I want to start playing with some of the green as well. So I'm going to come in with a bit of the darker green, and maybe, let's see what happens. We're going to have the dark green on one half of the brush and the cadmium green on the other. And when I come in with a blended brush like that, what's going to happen is that some areas will have that dark and some has that light, and I don't have to worry too much about it. So as long as I'm covering my canvas, I'm not too worried about whether or not I'm mixing the two colors. The complementary color of the red in here and the green will give me a bit of a brown, which will work to my advantage in that background of the flowers. So again, a bit of the dark green and a bit of the light green right on my brush, a bit of water to help it blend. And I'm just coming right over my areas. Here I want it to be a bit brighter with that green. And down here, let's say it's a bit darker, so I'll just pick up a bit more of the dark green and let that come through. Again, because it's a background, really all I'm concentrating on is making sure that I have coverage on that canvas and that there's no bright spots of white that are coming through. I'm going to pick up just a bit of that yellow, and that'll pick up some green, just to add a different color on this end. It still has some green on my brush and some on the canvas, but with that yellow you can see that it just subtly changes it without going into too much effort of really worrying about blending colors. Alright, so on the side here, I think I'm going to bring that blue down with a bit of the green right here. So the brilliant blue with that green will give me a really nice turquoise color, and really just play with it and let's see where it goes, depending on your brush stroke, how much paint you pick up. Every time it'll be a little bit different. So I'm not too worried that this area has some white spots, because that's where we're going to add our flowers. So now I'm going to wash off that big brush now that the background has the color on it. I'm going to switch into the round brush. So this is the flat, it's flat, but it's got a rounded top to it. Add a little bit of water, and I'm going to go right into that dark purple. So what we're going to start with is down here, we're going to give just the impression of there being some flowers that are peeking through. So all it is a few bunches and brush strokes that'll give you the impression of being flowers without having to go and really paint every single little piece. You don't have to do every petal. They don't even have to really have much of a shape, other than just the rounded brush will give you that impression of having that round petal, and you can go and play with it. The same way that I went from the dark purple into the violet, we're going to do the same thing with the flowers. So from the purple flowers, I'm going to start and just bring in some of the violet as I go up. You can also bring the violet down into the purple. Just moving my brush around. If you leave your brush always in the same direction, you'll always get the same brush stroke. So when you're painting, I try and turn my brush around, see what brush stroke I can add to just add a bit more movement. So you can turn your wrist, you can turn your brush, and see how that works. As I move up, I'm going into a little bit more of a pink. It's called a rose red. It's not quite as bright as the cadmium red, but it does have a really nice quality to it that's a little bit brighter. And what I love about this one is that if you add a bit of white to it, to the rose red, it really turns into beautiful pink. So again, I'm just not really worried about making out every flower, but I'm just getting some coverage and a few shapes, moving my brush around, getting right into moving that paint color, that brighter one, right up to the top. So because I have both white and the pink on the brush, or that red, what happens is that as I'm painting, if I don't smush it around too much, it actually gives me my highlights and some of the shadows just naturally. So I don't have to worry too much about coming back in the end and worrying about whether or not I have highlights and shadows and things like that. So let's make a big pink lupus up here. And now right over some of the areas here, I'll just add some highlights. And again, just moving with my brush, making sure I'm getting all those different angles with my wrist and the brush to give some different highlights and lowlights. Another way to do it is if you put light on one side, like we did with the green, light on one side and the red on the other. If you try and keep the highlighted one at the top, you'll see that it'll just naturally give you all those shadows in there. As I run out of paint, I'm using it to my advantage so that now that color will be a bit more subdued and some of that green will actually come through. Now I have that one there. Let's bring another one up there. So I'm going to start with a little bit of that purple. Moving into a bit of the violet. Now I'm trying to cover a little bit more of that canvas because I have that white there. Moving that brush around, getting all those different shapes and shades. Now into the red. And now that I'm into where the sun's going to be hitting it, that's where I want to start adding a little bit of that white with the red. And it'll give me that pink. And I'm going to play with some of the paint that's already down there to use that as some of those shadows. And again, just moving my brush around. The nice thing about abstract flowers is that you don't have to worry too much about every single petal. Here's where the light is. Going to get some of the dark on one side of the brush, some white on the other. So here I have the dark red and the white. Keep the white at the top, and as I'm painting, it'll just naturally highlight all those little pieces as I move my brush around. Get some of those on the side where you have that sun. That's where you want some of those lighter petals. That's where you can add that white. Come in and just really get some of those nice bright colors on there. Now that we have most of our background, what I'm going to do is wash off that brush and come back in with a little bit of the green. So I'm going to start with the dark green and add some leaves. And I'm just going to start right in, not worrying where you're coming out of. So as I do the leaves, what I'm doing is that I'm going to start it flat and then I'm turning it so that it ends up being vertical. And that'll give you, without having to draw that triangle shape, you get to just come in and it'll add some of those shapes just naturally by using your brush. So here I'm just turning them. I'm not worried. If you pick a color or pick a spot where there's, let's say here. So here I have the side of the purple, so there's some flowers here. If I start my leaf right between those and then turn it, I don't have to worry about making a leaf and then putting the flower in front of it, because it'll just naturally look like it's right behind there. And now to blend it, I took some dark green, added some light to it. So as I'm coming forward, that'll highlight that leaf without necessarily ever having to worry too much about getting the highlight and the shadow on it. So that's a really nice way to get some of those leaf shapes without too much effort. So right in the middle, let's give an idea of a stem. I didn't have to paint the whole stem. All you have to do is paint in some of the open spots, and that'll show you. Nobody knows whether or not you did the stem before or after, because all you're seeing is now that stem peeking through a little bit. I'm going to grab a little bit of white with that green just to come and highlight maybe one or two blades that are a little bit higher. If ever you have one that's in the shadow, the top is going to be highlighted, and then the bottom of it, just go over it again, and that'll give it its shadow. And you don't have to worry too much about it, because you already have the light and dark that's on it there. Let's make those. Let's make a leaf that's a little bit more in the light there. Here again, I start with my brush that's nice and broad. Just turn it, and that will give you that nice leaf shape just by turning your brush. Just like that. Let's add a few down here that are poking through. Maybe a couple of longer ones just to cut a little bit of that color right about there. One that's just catching that sun. Right like that. There we go. Alright, so really quickly you can see that you can add, just by moving your brush around and playing with a bit of colors, that you don't have to go into a lot of detail to get some really nice effects of some wildflowers. If you want, you can keep on playing in the background with some of the reds and some of the pinks to really start blending, depending on how far back you want it to go. So what I'm going to try and do now is that I think that I'm going to have maybe some of the white daisies that are going to be sitting in the front. So for when you're doing some white flowers, you want to keep the bright white for right at the end. So those are the highlights. Either you can make it blue or purple or add a bit of pink to it. For my shadows, I'm just going to add a little bit of brown into the white to give me a very light beige. So now, right around here, we're going to start coming in, and I'm going to pick a point, and that's going to be the middle of my flower. So we're going to do the petals that are furthest first. So from the middle, I'm going to come down and paint down, always keeping that brush stroke towards the outside. And then on the edge, you can round it. If it picks up some of the color, that's fine. Now from the middle again, I'm coming out. I'm going to pick up a little bit more brown for the ones that are right in the middle. And then I'm going to do that third petal right about there. So right now it's looking a little bit odd, but sometimes it has to look different before, so that you can get all the steps on there for it to really look like what you want. You can also use your round brush, and it'll give you the same effect, especially when it comes to making the edges of your petals. So with the round brush, you can come in, and as long as you bring it always towards the center, it should be fine. So these are the ones that are on the furthest side of the flower. Once you have your main petals down, what you want to do is work from the back front. So from the back of the flower here, then I'm going to add just a touch of color with the yellow, add in a touch of white, and by dabbing it, I'm mixing the yellow and the white, but I'm also leaving some of it there. I'm going to get rid of some of that yellow, and now we're going to start doing all those petals that are in front. So now that's when I'm going to use that bright white. I'm going to start just doing the thinner ones right around the front, and on this side, always remembering that all the petals come towards the middle. So if I want a petal that's kind of, you see this, the side and the front of it here, that's how you can just play with your brush stroke and the white to really get that shape. And then I'm saving that nice bright white for this one last petal that's going to be right in front. Now, if you can't, if you see that they're really close, like right now my paint is a little bit wet, so I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow to it. Let's go a bit into that purple. Just by adding a bit of shadow onto those two petals that are leaning more towards the front. Then I'll let that dry for a second, and I'll come back with the bright white, and you'll see that it'll just make it pop. So we'll try another one, and let's go with a little bit of blue in our brown. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. Let's make another one right about here. So I'm going to do the first, here's my center. So I'm doing the first layer of petals, a little bit with that dark, with the blue and a bit of brown. And then I'm going to come in with that white. And then from the center, I'm just working my way out. And that'll give me a really easy way to get that shadow in there just by using the paint that's already there. Now, I'm not sure how many petals this guy has, but let's just keep on adding a few. So now that I have the basic of the darker color, we're going to come in, and the top ones here are going to be very white, so the middle down here has to be a little bit darker, because that's where the shadow actually is. So we're just going to add a little bit of shadow there. Here there's going to be a little bit of white, where the light's going to hit the top here. It's going to hit a bit of this edge, let's say a bit of that one, and a bit of that one, and now it's really going to hit the top, let's say, of this flower that's folded over just a little bit. There's that last petal there. Now that I have my white, let's add a bit more on that one. I can come back in over here with that white to really show that petal that's coming over. In the middle of this flower, again, I'm going to grab that yellow, put some in, and then I'm going to come directly into my white, get some white on my brush, and just come and dab into that yellow to mix it, and just like that you have that nice look with the shadows and the highlights. And that's when you can come in with a bit of a smaller brush and come and do a little bit of the details and attach the flowers if need be. So just like that, I hope you can take some tips and tricks from there and keep on going and make your own little set of wildflower flowers. And I'll see you next time on Painting with Yuk-Sem.